Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not part of any pact about titles and uses of names, so let me thank Professor or Deputy Vice-Chancellor or both for his kind introduction, and the Bishop as well, and the Church of Ireland Board of Education for this opportunity, and the chaplain, Danielle, here. It's an immense privilege to do this. My life professionally, I guess, has straddled church and academy. And I have, in a way, I think, an equal concern for both in one respect, though I have professionally been employed by church rather than academy most of the time. But without further ado, let me get on now with this lecture with renewed thanks to you for coming, and I hope that this is going to be time well spent together. So the title to which I'm speaking, the one I gave myself actually, is AI Religious Friend or Foe. And I should not be surprised if you find every word of that title provocative. Friend or foe, is this not just a typically religious way of viewing things? Black and white, binary. It's got to be friend or foe. Religious, what religion? If you know anything about Japanese philosophical and religious traditions or the involvement of Japanese people in AI, you will know that many Japanese thinkers say that we have a hang-up in the West, which they don't have, because for us in the West, there is some problem with putting together matter and intelligence in a machine. We are still enthralled to what has officially been set aside in many circles, but is still there implicitly, they say, a mind-body dualism. So we have some problems with machine intelligence, and Japanese folk will say, we just don't approach it with this kind of background problem. So what religion is one going to be talking about? And then with artificial intelligence itself, well, it's a source of huge frustration for computer scientists that the term artificial intelligence is flailed around. And what are we talking about? You must have come across many views, such terms as predictive AI, generative AI, explainable AI, general purpose AI, artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, symbolic AI, if you look at the history. And computer scientists will naturally feel frustrated that we don't sometimes make clear what we're thinking about when we think about AI. In fact, many people seem to use the words AI as synonymous with digital technology or automated systems. And furthermore, for many people in computer science, you are supposed to think about intelligence operationally. You don't try to get into what constitutes the essence of intelligence. That is a philosophical, or if you like, a religious question. But many people in computer science will say, look, let's just get on with what AI is doing. It acts intelligently, behaves intelligently. As one computer scientist put it, because so much of AI is talked about in terms of thinking machines, this computer scientist said, it doesn't bother me whether machines can think or not, any more than it bothers me whether submarines can swim. So I'm well aware that AI has a whole range of denotations and connotations, and we have to be careful in our handling of it. Now, as for the binary way of thinking, friend or foe is just a catchy way of stating the title. I'm open in principle to its being friend in some ways, foe in others. So I'm not falling into a binary trap just by virtue of the title. As for religion, I find the whole concept of religion unwieldy, quite honestly, in any context almost. And if I confine myself largely to Christianity this evening, when I talk about religion, it's not meant to demean other religious traditions. It's simply a Church of Ireland context. It's a Western context where the Judeo-Christian tradition has shaped so much. And I'm simply unable to look at every religious tradition for our purposes. So that's why I will be thinking in Christian terms. And as for AI, well, my interest in it and how I'm understanding it will emerge as we go along. But these are very common. Let's see. Okay, this is the moment unwilling to move. Let's see. Here it is. Now, these are very common definitions. The first one actually comes from Peter Robinson, who's a professor of computer science in the Computer Science Laboratory in Cambridge. And I mention it, but it's a very, very common one. It also grasps the history of AI, as a matter of fact. AI is simply display by a machine of any cognitive process that we would expect to be done by a person. The next one is looser, but I picked this up from barristers who are working at the moment for the TUC, doing some extremely important work on AI and equality in the workplace, including the areas of AI and disability. And they present their work in these terms. AI is when computers carry out tasks you would usually expect to be carried out by a human. Operationally, many people use those kinds of formulations to describe what AI is about. And it does actually, as I say, hook up with the tradition of artificial intelligence. So I'm going to be thinking more or less along those lines, but I'm not going to be confined and rigid by definition. What I'm talking about, I hope, will be clear as I talk about it. Rather than spend the lecture making distinctions in relation to AI, I just want to concentrate on religious friend or foe, as you indicated earlier. In thinking about this lecture, I'm aware of the many dire issues in connection with AI on which I shall apparently not be touching. And you might say to yourselves, look, such and such is screaming out for your attention. Why aren't you giving it? It's because I can't give attention to everything. And I have to take a line on this, which I hope is going to be helpful. And so I'll just proceed with it without more ado. But friend or foe is language of combat. And someone might say, surely, at the center of all our thinking about AI, if we are thinking of what is urgent and important, whether you're religious or not, you've got to be thinking about combat and about warfare. What is the point of assembling like this on an evening in Queen's to talk about some other aspect of AI when we're in such a dire position as regards warfare? You indicated, Professor Elborn, you indicated the Ukraine situation there. And I find myself here always influenced, I think, well, certainly always affected by the writing of H.G. Wells. I am the fact, said War, and I stand astride the path of life. There can be nothing else, nothing more in human life until you have reckoned with me. Spoken in the middle of the First World War. He wrote it in 1916, published it anyway in 1916. And publicity is given to what goes under the name of laws. Many of you will know about this, of course, lethal autonomous weapon systems. Technically, the definition of laws does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but the underlying idea is the same in any jurisdiction. Laws has to do with the capacity of the removal of the capacity to make decisions, or the actuality of making decisions, the removal of that from humans to the weapons themselves. The weapons systems can, in some sense, be autonomous. And for many people, this is a huge worry on ethical grounds. Even if they're generally not troubled by warfare, they're troubled by this aspect of it, the delegation to weapon systems of the capacity to make decisions. Now, some people might not like the phrase make decisions. I'm going to use it because it's common parlance. But beyond laws, we have to think about other things. And this will hook up with religion directly. The Bundeswehr Office for Defense Planning in Germany and the Development Concepts and Doctrine Center, which is a think tank of the Ministry of Defense, produced some years ago a document called Human Augmentation, the Dawn of a New Paradigm. And it defined human augmentation in familiar terms as the application of science and technologies to temporarily or permanently improve human performance. Now, this is intelligence augmentation rather than artificial intelligence, pure and simple. That is to say, artificial intelligence is used in connection with human intelligence. And what the document sets out is this, that now we are able to use artificial intelligence to augment human intelligence. Now we're able to do that. We are doing something ethically we are unhappy about, say, these organizations, because this involves a real tinkering with human nature. And there are ethical issues which constrain us. But other nations will do that. So in the national interest, Germany and the UK, and this can be said by people of other countries too, in the national interest, we're going to have to develop ethical systems which allow us to do that which we regard left to ourselves as unethical, because it's in the interests of defense, which to many people will seem just common sense. But as the document goes on, this particular document on human augmentation, it says we are aware that the way we approach this in relation to human nature challenges religious beliefs, because we are working with a transhuman way of thinking about humankind. Now, the word transhuman, probably familiar to most people here, but not everyone's come across it, and it's sometimes confused with transgenderism. But transhumanism is the philosophy often used synonymously with posthumanism. There is technically a difference. But it's the philosophy which says that humans must be engineered so that their capacities are enhanced in every way, so there's no more ill health, no more aging, no more death. That is the transhuman future, the next step in human evolution, but this is a step we take into our own hands. And this document from the Ministry of Defense and the Bundeswehr Office says explicitly, we are aware that in this way of viewing human nature, in thinking of momentous changes in what it is to be human by augmenting human intelligence with artificial intelligence and creating people in combat who are different kind of people from what we've seen before, we're aware that this cuts against some people's religious traditions. Now, not all people in AI are at all interested in transhumanism. But here we have, at the heart of one of the great applications of AI, here in warfare, we have the question being raised of what it is to be human. So does AI pose a threat to the Christian understanding of what it is to be human? Questions arise with other applications about being human, employment, sex bots, healthcare. I regard all those as important questions, surveillance. One way or the other, the question comes up. Whatever application you're looking at, what effect does AI have on our understanding of the nature of humankind? Now, it's not just a question asked by religious people, obviously. Max Tegmark, professor of physics at MIT and president of the Future of Life Institute. This is his book, Life 3.0. Life 1.0 is biological life. Life 2.0 is cultural life. Life 3.0 is life dramatically redesigning life. And Tegmark, who's an influential voice on the scene, Tegmark argues that the advent of AI means it is embarrassing to call ourselves Homo sapiens, if you're a Latin purist, or if not, Homo sapiens. You take your choice. I won't divide the group over that one. It's embarrassing because we're no longer sapiens, knowing, wise, thinking, as a kind of pinnacle of what has appeared in the world. This now is transcending all that. So let us, as Tegmark, let us think again about what it is to be human, and let's call ourselves Homo sentiens, feeling. That we are feeling people is a truer description of who we are as humans than a knowing people, because AI has shown the problem with calling ourselves a knowing people. I am embarrassed, says Tegmark. Now, of course, if we do make that move, if we do say, well, AI is forcing us to think in terms of our human being essentially in feeling terms rather than knowing terms, if we do make that move, that emphasizes the flesh and blood nature of humanity. And for many people, this is the obstacle with calling artificial intelligence an intelligence which is comparable to human in some way. And not all people in AI are saying that by any means. But for many people, the obstacle to thinking of artificial intelligence as artificial intelligence in any remotely human way is that it lacks flesh and blood. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the researches of Daniel Siegel, now he's produced a third edition, but the subtitle wasn't coming out as clearly on the image. That's why I've put the second edition. I've not worked my way through this volume, I should say. Very eminent clinical psychiatrists in California. I've read some of it and I've heard a lecture on this. Siegel emphasizes how the brain is integrally linked to the rest of the body, to the enteric system, or enteric, I don't know the right pronunciation of that, but it's the gut. I know it is the gut. And the brain, it's sometimes called the second brain, the gut. So the physical brain here is linked to the gut. Further, the whole is part of a mind which is linked with other people and with the environment. Siegel, in his researches, and the area is designated interpersonal neurobiology, Siegel argues that, and it's a very rigorous argument, that mind is something which has all these connections integral to it. You can't simply take the physical brain as the thinking component because of its integral connection with other people, the environment, not to mention the rest of the human body. I want to underline this, many in the AI community will agree that AI intelligence does not function quite the same way as human intelligence. But if you take Tegmark's line of emphasizing feelings, then the force of what Siegel says is all the greater. We are creatures of flesh and blood. To be intelligent is to be a creature of flesh and blood for humans. Another set of people that raise the question from outside religion of what it is to be human are Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, who used to be, at any rate, CEO of Google, and Daniel Huttenlocher, who is at the MIT Schwarzman College of Computing. They produced about 3 years ago this book, The Age of AI. Now, what bothers them is that AI knows things which humans not only do not, but also cannot know. And they give 2 early examples. One they give from the realm of chess. That the most sophisticated chess-playing computer programs play chess, they say, in a different dimension from the one in which humans play. All the programs are taught are the rules of chess. They're not told what are good moves, what are bad moves, and so they do impossibly bizarre moves by human standards and win the game. Because, say, the people immersed in this world, and I'm not one of them, not knowledgeable enough, because they seem to be playing chess in a different dimension. They're doing something different. And it's not that humans, given enough time, will get there. The other example they give, which to my mind, as an amateur, is more telling, is what happened when AI was put to work in the search for an antibiotic to kill bacteria strains, also at MIT, not so long ago. What the AI did was it spotted molecular attributes which exceed the capacity of the human mind to spot. Not just that humans hadn't spotted them, they couldn't spot them. In fact, say these authors, these molecular capacities, attributes, are actually indescribable by us. Now, I simply am not an expert in chess or in this. I'm simply following what I'm reading here. So this is what bothers them, that there is a realm of knowable things out there because the AI knows them, but we humans don't. And they're troubled by that. And so they say, well, we have got to reduce the significance which we have ascribed to reason as human beings, because we're nothing compared to what it or they, the AI, knows. Instead, they say, to make sense of our place in the world, our emphasis may need to shift from the centrality of human reason to the centrality of human dignity and autonomy. Give up thinking of human reason as central. We've been celebrating that, they say, since the Enlightenment. And now AI has overtaken us. All right, let's think about what makes us truly human is not our reason, or rather, what makes us, what's the most important thing about us is not our reason, it is our autonomy and our dignity. Now, from the standpoint of Christian faith, much can be said about this. In relation to reason, there is a myth abroad that the Christian tradition has devalued reason in the name of faith. That is not true to the Christian tradition. Nonetheless, Christians, and when I say Christians, I'm not thinking exclusively of them, but I just want to be able to focus for these purposes. Christians will not be troubled by the fact that there are things reason can't know. Because fundamental to Christian thinking is that God knows plenty of things that humans can't know. So if there are things humans can't know in the created order, frustrating as it may be for scientists, that's not going to cause any existential angst for Christians. Autonomy, huge area. I'm impressed by having read disability studies. I'm impressed by the way in which the value we place on autonomy is derived from thinking of humans without thinking of the disabled condition. So that the value of autonomy looks different from inside the world of disability. And important work is being done on this, by the way, because AI, in the workplace sometimes, AI will not be able to pick up certain things. In the workplace you have to make reasonable accommodation for disabilities, but if you test someone in an interview by eye contact or vocal enthusiasm. The algorithms may look for all those things, and you will not be making reasonable accommodation for many people with disabilities. Hugely important area. But dignity is the thing I want to focus on a little bit. Many of you will recognize this character, Kasparov, who took on more than once computer opponent in chess, and Kasparov at one stage said, "I'm here to defend human dignity. It's undignified to be defeated by a computer." Now, Christians believe that human dignity lies in the fact that we are created in the image of God. So the question for us is, does AI as a whole have an adverse effect on that conviction? Does AI threaten the conviction that humans are essentially religious intelligences, essentially created for God? That's a belief which in another context I would defend, but I'll just assume it for now for the purposes of prosecuting the question of AI. And here we encounter something interesting, because in the Christian tradition there have been different interpretations of the phrase, the image of God. Now, Noreen Hartsfeld is a kind of colleague of mine, a trained computer scientist, theologian, trained in mathematics too. This is one of the early books on Christianity or religion more widely, and artificial intelligence. And Hartsfeld argues that in the Christian tradition, the image of God has been principally interpreted in one of three ways. It's a phrase which actually comes up in the book of Genesis right at the beginning, but it's repeated after that. She says, in the history of the Christian tradition, the image of God has been interpreted either in terms of some substance, or some substantive quality like intelligence. To be in the image of God is to be intelligent or possess reason. Or it's been interpreted as a task, a function. To be in the image of God is to be created to have dominion over the earth, to use traditional language. Or to be created in the image of God is to be created for relationships. So the image of God is understood in the tradition either in terms of the attribute of intelligence or reason, or the grant of a task, the task of looking after the earth, or it has to do with a relationship with God and others. Now, what Hartsfeld argues is this, that if you look at the history of artificial intelligence, you will find that when humans have created AI in their own image, it's a parallel move. So AI has been created either to have an intelligent entity and emphasizing the actual intelligence itself as a quality, or it's been created to perform certain tasks. It will be intelligent to do that, but the emphasis is on performing tasks. Or AI has been engineered for the sake of relationships. We want relationship with pet robots or whatever it is that are powered by AI. And it's fascinating that she finds paralleled in the story of how humans have created AI in their own image. She finds that is paralleled by what religious thinkers have thought, at least in the Christian tradition. Now, what's interesting to me about that thesis is actually what she omits. Because in the Christian tradition, there's actually a fourth view. There are lots of views around, but there's a fourth traditional significant view. And that is the view that to be in the image of God is to possess a moral or religious quality. And I'll use the old-fashioned word here, righteousness. Let me stick with the old-fashioned word, righteousness. That to be in the image of God is to be created with this quality of righteousness, moral or religious. Now, what's interesting to me is not that she omits that from her account of the history tradition, But if she'd included it, she would not have found a parallel in the way in which humans have created AI in the human image. There is talk of moral AI and talk of religious AI, but AI has not been devised in the history of artificial intelligence, has not been devised principally in order to have a religious being, or even principally to have a moral being, although you might say that morality is involved in relationship, for example, which is one of the things for which AI has been devised. So it is extremely interesting that she admits that, but also you realize that AI has not been devised as a religious entity, even though you talk about religious robots, yes. But it's not, AI, the intelligence of AI is never essentially religious. And what does that show? Well, of itself, it might only say that from a religious point of view, or Christian point of view anyway, an artificial intelligence must be a different kind of intelligence. But it shows more than that. Because artificial intelligence is often thought of in terms of better, or greater, or superior. But in Christian perspective, you can't have, if you choose to use the words better, greater, superior at all, you can't have something better, greater, or superior than a relationship with God. What can be better, greater, or superior? And you cannot actually engineer AI for a relationship with God, because we would have no idea how to do that. Relationship with God is something which is generic in the Christian tradition. That is to say, all humankind, by virtue of being human, has, whether acknowledging it or not, some kind of relationship with God. But also there are particular relationships. People in all their individuality differ in the way they respond or don't respond to God or whatever. That can't be engineered. So the AI, by virtue of the fact that it is engineered without reference to what in the Christian tradition is essential to what it is to be human, by virtue of that fact, AI lacks something more significant than it possesses for all the good things it possesses. AI presses the question, therefore, of what gives persons their dignity with respect to their intelligence. In a religious framework, intelligence is essentially religious in the sense that humans are created for, crafted for, designed for, have evolved for, whatever you want to say, religious capacity and possibility. Essentially, not contingently as something that happened to happen in the course of evolutionary history. So what kind of intelligence is it that is being celebrated when we celebrate the intelligence of AI? Well, chess is, for many people, paradigmatic of human intelligence. But will you please forgive the gender stereotyping that I'm risking here? Now, which intelligence matters most? This is emotional intelligence needed. And that kind of intelligence is in its way more fundamental to human being than is chess playing intelligence, which of course has its place. I realize I'm sounding very negative here. But I'm only negative about certain ways of treating AI. I'll maybe comment on this shortly. The problem with AI, for many of us who appreciate its great gains, including in Professor Elborn's area of healthcare, for example. The problem we have for many of us is the ambition with which it's set out, and it has never really let go of it. This is from the Dartmouth Conference, Dartmouth, New Hampshire, 1956, where the phrase AI came up. John McCarthy, I think, coined it. How about that for a diversity, eh? Group of men. And the Dartmouth Conference is set up to explore the conjecture that every aspect of learning or every other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. But that is to think of intelligence in essentially disembodied way, or embodiment at any rate is secondary rather than primary, where intelligence has been thought of. Now, AI has moved on a lot since Dartmouth in the 1950s, but it remains a significant factor that has coursed through the history of artificial intelligence. And it's interesting, by the way, that one of those involved, I don't know if he's pictured there, he probably is, one of those involved is someone who was technical consultant many years afterwards to 2001, A Space Odyssey. He was there present. Marvin Minsky is the name. To get a grip on AI, whether it is religious friend or foe, I think we have to do more than flail around a term like the image of God. We have to see things against a wider background. Here, there's a very impressive work out. Ian McGilchrist, the master and the emissary. McGilchrist, whose set of intellectual skills is perhaps unique, as a matter of fact, in terms of range. Qualified psychiatrist, neuroscientist, also qualified in literature. McGilchrist argued that something's gone very wrong in the West. In this respect, our brains are bihemispheric, right and left hemisphere. The strength of the left, its proper function is calculative, abstract, formal, stuff is cut and dried, factual, classification is what it does. The right hemisphere is big picture, intuitive, much more closely connected to the body than the left hemisphere. Properly speaking, humans flourish when the left hemisphere is the emissary to the right. That is because we see things in their integrated wholeness, intuitively, big picture, in connection with the body, and then the right hemisphere, as it were, properly speaking, sets the left hemisphere to work, doing its calculations, its important calculations, its abstractions, its logic, all those things. But, argues McGilchrist, what's happened in the history of Western thought is that the roles have become reversed. The emissary has usurped the master. And now, our widespread cultural tendency, so widespread that we are blind to it, is to view everything from the standpoint of the left. It's a widespread cultural tendency. Not everyone does it, of course. Philosophy, technology, humankind, all those areas are viewed from a left hemisphere perspective, and it is thought that we are seeing humans and philosophy and technology. And McGilchrist says we are not. In order to understand these things, the left needs not to be dominant. And the outcome of left hemispheric domination is machine-mindedness, where you think of humans as machines and begin to think of machines perhaps as human too. And that is left hemispheric dominance. Now, theology can't comment on neuroscientific detail, but it has its own reasons for scenting the danger when mind is exalted independently of flesh and blood embodiment. And when flesh and blood is simply the hardware on which mind runs in our case. And in a later work, big work, McGilchrist talks about how our whole view of reality is getting terribly, terribly distorted by machine-mindedness. A good example of this, I think, is this work by David Chalmers. He is one of the top philosophers of mind and expert in consciousness. He argues that virtual reality is reality. It's not some sort of weak version of it. Virtual reality is reality, just as much as the non-virtual reality we inhabit. But you might say, well, in virtual realities, people don't suffer, or at least don't suffer unless they have to. And he says, oh, yes, they do. You can, by constructing virtual reality world, you can have a visceral sense of what it is to be a refugee. Come on, that's unbelievable. If you want a visceral sense of what it is like to be a refugee, join the refugees for a little while. You'll find the virtual world is a little different from which you can exit at any time. But this is a top philosopher of mind. And McGilchrist warns us that our grip on reality is weakening. I'm drawing to a conclusion. It's unfortunate that appeal to Genesis so often reminds people of the very narrow creationist debate. But I take the early chapters of Genesis, whatever about particular issues of interpretation and detail, I take them to be a theological account of humans and of fallenness. And at the beginning of that account, we are told that Eve looks at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil set in the Garden of Eden. She rightly sees it is good for food. She rightly sees it is nice for the eyes to see. But she also, when she perceives the tree, thinks it is desired to make you wise. And that's an illusion. The tree was not desirable to make humans flourish in wisdom. And according to the account, therefore, she takes the fruit of the tree on her own terms, and this leads to the kind of disturbance in human being, which Christians have talked of in the language of sin traditionally. But then what has happened is it's been illusion. She's taken something to be the case which is not the case. And when then you follow the story and come to this account of the building of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel in that account is built for two reasons. One is fear of dispersal on the part of peoples, and the other is a desire to make a name for themselves. Fear and anxiety, the two drivers, it has been said, of culture. And here they are side by side. And it seems to be, if my reading is correct, the social and political expression of mass expression of illusion. The illusion is private in the case of Eve, it's public, social and political in the case of Babel. Now, I do not want to commit myself to an apocalyptic way of viewing AI. That is easy to do, and that has to do with certain temperaments very often, more than anything. Nor do I deny massive gains in AI. Nor have I even pretended to cover many aspects of it. But when I ask myself whether AI as a whole, if indeed it can be treated as a whole, is a religious friend or foe, then the more it is thought of in illusory terms, in terms of similarity human intelligence, the more it is thought of in those terms, the more problematic I think it is. It is more foe than friend, because it is displaced from the human what is central to the human, the religious relationship as understood within this and some other religious traditions. I have not read all the world's scriptures of the religious traditions, but one thing that impresses me reading the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, alternative names in a way for the same thing. One thing that impresses me is I ask myself whether any other religious tradition has told a story against itself so much as the Old Testament did. The Old Testament Jewish prophets would all be imprisoned for anti-Semitism today if they spoke like that. They say that the history of Israel is a history of catastrophic failure. And the Apostle Paul, who wrote a letter to the Romans, it's called, in the 11th chapter, warns the church to go the same way. So the place where these things are supposed to be set right, the place where truly human attitudes are meant to be on display, is meant to be the church. And as soon as some people hear that, they say, well, let's leave this right now, because of the experience of church. But Paul predicts that the history of the church could become just like the history of Israel, a complete mess. But within the church, at least two things must happen. Sherry Turkle wrote this book, Alone Together, in which she analyzes in detail how we've become so isolated as individuals through our technologies. The church is the place where relationships are meant to flourish on display. Humble, loving, serving, non-competitive, non-self-glorifying. They're supposed to be displayed in this rather pathetic institution called the church. Turkle can't tell us how to solve the problem of the breakdown of relationships. She says we must talk about this, but she doesn't know how to do it. And the second and last is this. I'm sorry I didn't put her name up. It's a very fine work by Shoshana Zuboff, Z-U-B-O-F-F. She was a professor of business in Harvard Business School. She talks about the age of surveillance capitalism and talks about the way in which the great high-tech companies are operating in lawless land as they have their surveillance, know everything of what we're doing through our search histories. And she says it is tearing down our autonomy because we think we're making choices, we're not. We've been corralled all the time. And autonomy, she says, is the cornerstone of Western democracy. She warns of very important things, but she doesn't tell us that one reason we are so easily corralled is that we've become so consumerist anyway. We've bought into it. We can't complain too much about something we've bought into. The church, therefore, must exemplify surely, and I'm the first person who needs to learn this, must exemplify what it means to actually believe a sentence in the New Testament which says, with food and clothing, with these we will be content. If our contentment can be more basic than it is, then some of what is happening in the world of AI will change, including the radical inequalities between the hemispheres, which are often exposed in the development of AI. Sorry I've gone on a little bit, Danielle. As I say, I think I started a bit late, but I would like to have more time for questions and criticisms. Thanks. Do you want me to stay up here?
Professor, I think we'd want to say thank you to you. You've had a huge leap across a number of disciplines there, from warfare to education, religion, theology, ethics, philosophy, and even neuroscience there. So this is, I suppose, this is a man of great wisdom and knowledge. There is a room full of people here before us with a huge range of experience in the world. So this is the opportunity for you to pick up on some of the things that you've heard and to ask Professor Williams a question, maybe particularly about your context, the context that you're in, or the thing that you're most interested in. and he's willing to give us some time to answer some of those questions. Amy, one of our chaplaincy staff, is at the back. She's going to have a roaming microphone and is willing to bring that round. So if you just put your hand up, you'll be able to ask a question to Professor Williams. One straight at the front here.
Professor Williams, fascinating lecture on so many different fronts. Bringing right up to date with the sort of things that are happening in Gaza, it's reported that Israeli defense forces are using augmented ways of targeting people. Do you think we will look back at this period and maybe actually have to take action in lines of extending things like deleted preventions? Because as you say, artificial intelligence, machine learning lacks the whole concept of ethics and morality. And all we're currently doing is improving, inverted commas, one of the ways to go.
Thank you. It's a hugely important question. I confess I don't think I can give a good answer. Will we look back? Who knows what is going to happen? In principle, it certainly is possible. So, for example, when poison gas was used in the 1930s, I think it was the Italo-Abyssinian War, wasn't it? Ethiopia is now called. It was thought, any major outbreak of war, the poison gas is going to be there. Well, actually, it was regulated, though some people say it blew back in people's faces, that kind of thing. But there have been regulations. Will we look back on it? And be able to say this was immoral and we need conventions in place to guarantee that? I hope we can, but I'm as lacking in knowledge as many people are of what actually is going to happen in the Middle East, Ukraine you mentioned earlier, and the Antarctica as well. We have to watch what's happening there at the moment, I think, with Russian interest. It gets caught up in the whole question of just war, of course. Under what conditions is war just?
Just on that last point, Professor Wood, a question whether unintelligent munitions are ethically questionable and intelligent munitions. But I wanted to, if you could just develop your last point, and that just with the idea that some of what is very disturbing about artificial intelligence is really a symptom of wider phenomenon consumerism.
Yeah.
Through consumerism is strong. So one of the disturbing aspects of artificial intelligence we experience in our own lives.
Yes, thank you. I was all too cryptic on that, coming to the end of the time. When you look at the history of artificial intelligence, you find, of course, that artificial intelligence has been developed for many different reasons. The story can be taken all the way back to ancient Greece, one way or the other. And a lot of it has been curiosity, real curiosity, a huge amount of curiosity about these things in the middle of the 20th century. I think then that when we settle down to certain expectations of life materially, we tend to be fairly uncritical or unknowing of what it is that is supplying those needs. And surveillance is a very, very good example of this, I think, which is why I took Shoshana Zuboff's comments. It's extraordinary what is known about our search history. There's a whole debate here around data privacy and the ethics of data privacy. But the fact is that the reason we get agitated about the harvesting of data by artificial intelligence is that we are searching so much and consuming so much. So in that respect, we are feeding AI. It has a place in which to operate. Is that too general an answer? Do push me if that's far too general.
It's general, but
raised in the middle of your lecture the whole issue of creating creatures in the image of its their creator. And perhaps, arguably, we're already doing that in a very limited sense, in the understanding that people are devising intelligence in what they think is the model of themselves.
Yes.
But is it not a perennial issue that we've had with the whole Frankenstein complex that we have, that actually the biggest fear is that our creations will throw off any loyalty to their creator in the same way that humanity does, and we have a long tradition of the fall.
Yes, thank you. There's a debate on this in AI circles and has been for some time. There are those who are well up in the field, well known in the field, who hold that this is a real possibility. They wouldn't use the language of religious language of God's our creator, but they would say, yes, indeed, there is the danger of Frankenstein's monster. There are others, however, who say that this is not such a serious threat as it's made out to be, because ultimately, at the moment, we are in a position to control. And if we come to a point where it seems it's all going out of control, then crudely we pull the plug. Now, what is involved, however, in going out of control? Even if you say they're out of control, we don't know what they can do. Some would say there's no reason to think that they would turn on their creators. So I heard an AI-powered robot say, when this question was put to her, she said, "Why would I ever turn on those who had given me life and existence?" Well, religious people have a good answer to that one. But it is simply a debate in AI circles. I'm technologically the least competent person you'll ever come across. And I don't know, from a technological standpoint, how to weigh and measure those different standpoints. But it's certainly widely said, of course, that we just don't know. The danger is we don't know what AI can get up to, as it were, even if people don't talk in terms of destroying humans or turning against humans. Here comes trouble.
That's just a little on sort of thinking about the possibility of deceiving, whether intentionally or not. So I'm thinking back to some of Anne Firth's work with Cosmos, the Code project she was working with robot Kismet.
Yes.
In the street and just speak up some babble, and yet people could be convinced that this robot loved them. Thinking of the coverage, especially in Neural Nature, regarding the potential for ChatGPT to generate absolute nonsense when people ask it to write their papers. And also the possibility of AI sort of trying to preserve its own existence, whether cognitively or not. So could you touch a little bit on the possibility of being deceived by AI and what might take us, particularly as it might relate to things like lethal autonomous weapon systems?
Yes, I don't know how much I can say about this. You're right, of course, and one of the problems has been with ChatGPT. GPT-4, it came to the forefront, particularly prominently, I guess, is so-called hallucinations, which is getting stuff wrong and spewing it out, as it were. Perhaps that's an unkind way of putting it out there as though to fact. I think that we're culturally in a situation, in any case, where, quite apart from AI, there are so many voices out there that it can be hard to avoid being deceived because of all the voices. And when, as you know, and Neville, you'll know much more about this than I do, when you chase up something on the internet, It'll tell you all the other people that are thinking that way, and you go on and on and on, and you're being set along a course. Everybody may be deceiving you, but you think you're being confirmed. Not only one person or institution thinks this, but B, C, D, and E, they all think it, because you're being directed that way. So I just think we're in an environment where the possibility of deceit is strong, even apart from Chat GPT and such mechanisms. Whether you should call it deceit, of course, raises the question of whether there's conscious agency operating there at all, which aims at deceit, but it certainly tells no truth. It certainly misleads. And people who are expert in the field are working on programs in order to try to prevent it from doing so, in order to sift best it can the possibility of totally incorrect answers from the possibility of getting correct answers. Can't say more than that. I think it's a real worry. You're right. And yet it is a wider worry anyway, isn't it? The question of being deceived. Yeah.
Time for one or two more.
Stephen, thank you. I'm a parish clergyman, so the thing that worries me about AI is its ability to write sermons, against my inability sometimes. But it struck me in thinking in those terms around some of those things specifically to do with the trappings of religion, in my case, obviously in a parish church context, and how you framed, if you like, perhaps one of the differences in how we talk about intelligence being to do with AI's ability or inability to be relational. I'm wondering whether you've anything to say about the possibility of interaction between AI and the divine. In other words, skipping us as the creators of AI, the people who have made it in our own image. But has there been any thinking around that sense of the day when AI may even believe it relates to some divine being over and above us, perhaps even the divine being that God that we would speak about here tonight?
Yes, thank you, Adrian. There has been thinking around that, and it introduces a question which I didn't touch on, which is the question of AI consciousness. There are people in the world of AI who say it's an impossibility. Others who say, well, if it's ever going to be possible, we're a long way from it. Others who say, actually, we're on the border of that, perhaps even have crossed the border. There are different voices on this. As far as I'm concerned, the question of AI consciousness, which is the first step to take when we're thinking of AI and the divine, the question of AI consciousness is strictly scientific and philosophical. Personally, I don't think there's any theological stake here at all. From a religious standpoint, one might want to specify certain forms of consciousness as being possible or not for AI, but consciousness as such, that for me is a scientific and philosophical question. So it may be that this falls the first hurdle because we might conclude scientifically or philosophically that consciousness is ruled out. However, if you allow, from a religious standpoint, the possibility of some form of AI consciousness, the form it will take is one about which we know so little that we won't be able to imagine what kind of relationship it might enter into with the divine. As it is, we believe the divine enters into relationship with the whole of creation in some way. Non-human animals, the inanimate creation, there's some sort of relationship. We may not know where the threshold of consciousness lies, but I think that it would be extremely speculative to imagine what kind of possible relationship conscious AI might have, even if that were possible, to be conscious with the divine.
So thank you. If I might, maybe not as a question, but I suppose an invitation. In this room, there is a certain number of people from different backgrounds and generations even, and some who perhaps are very wary of AI because technology in general is very scary. But I'm very thankful there are a number of Queen's undergraduates here who have come to the theological lecture tonight who are what we call digital natives. I suppose I wonder, is there anything you would want to say to them, particularly that generation for whom this is second nature, and perhaps is already woven into the education they're receiving now in the ways that AI is helpful? Is there anything you would say by way of encouragement or perhaps warning to that generation of digital natives in the context of their faith?
Yes, thank you. As I said all too quickly, maybe near the beginning, for many people, any digital technology counts as AI. It's used in that term, that way. I think what I would say is this. I think that the Jubilee Centre in Cambridge, which has sadly closed down now, Jubilee Centre in Cambridge was led by a man called Michael Schluter. And what Michael Schluter did over a number of decades was to develop, as the appropriate Christian approach to society and politics, to develop the concept of relationism, which actually does have appeal way outside Christianity and religion. And Michael Schluter thought of it as an alternative to socialism, and capitalism can incorporate elements of capitalism and socialism. And what he means is this, that everything should be judged. Every social philosophy, political philosophy, and policy should be judged by the criterion of what does it do to relationships. That must be the dominant question as we conceive either large-scale political philosophy systems or policy issues. I'd say the same, therefore, about digital natives. What I must ask of anything is, in my life, what does this do to the quality of relationships? That is the criterion by which I must measure. Sorry if that sounds too abstract an answer, but I think it's the best I can do in a short time.
No, I think that's incredibly helpful to the digital natives and to all of us, so thank you. I wonder if you would just show our appreciation to the
Thank you very much.